I think they should do it. 1 second. Keep going.
Testing.
Yes, keep going, though. Answer the question. Oh, what is the question? Here's the thing.
What do we get from the IGDA?
What does the group get from the IGDA if I go and join?
If you go and join, well, so based on our membership levels, sometimes we get some money. Sometimes we get like discounts to like GDC and stuff, which is just a member benefit anyways. But like IGDA, oh, Peter, did you put the link for our donations? We don't need you. You can just give us money. We actually got that set up. I forgot to put that in the slides because that was something Peter snuck in late last month. We do have a IGDA sanctioned donation link, which for those of you who have been part of the community for a while know that occasionally there's a lot of ask for forgiveness, not for permission, but we made the mistake of asking for permission, and now we have finally received it, and everything's good. What is the link, Peter? Do you remember?
I don't off the top of my head, but I will make sure to post it.
We will get it to you before the end, yes.
Yeah.
Are we still good now?
We are good. We have audio. Hooray!
So I was quiet again?
Yeah, what? Oh, no,
I
you don't have to do
wasn't
the slides
talking?
again. Just keep going.
Okay.
Great presentation. Everyone who's seen our presentations are worried about the intro. Go watch the older video.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the intros are the same. All right, so we didn't have any plugs or announcements, so we're done. We're moving on to our presentation for tonight, if I can get the slide to go.
Come on down.
Come on down, yeah. Nope. There we go. Yay. Here you go.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm actually going to. No, I'm actually going to go ahead and swap the slides because it's the old one. So we're going to go ahead and escape this one.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that works.
Because
Yeah, that one doesn't look like mine. It's not blue.
where'd my mouse go? That's the real problem, is where my mouse is. Oh no, not my mouse. Okay, you know what? I'll take care of this on the computer side.
Well, I'll let him give him a second here to get things going. But tonight we're going to be talking about how you define success and how you get there, and more importantly, how if you do get there, how not to end up having like a mini panic attack over how much success you've actually had. And I'm not saying that I'm wildly successful, but I was saying that I went into my first game with very low expectations of how successful I would be, but somehow still managed to run a fairly successful Kickstarter campaign. No, back. Yeah, there we go. So you know, things we'll be talking about tonight. First off, who is this guy anyway, and why is he talking to me? That's a perfectly reasonable question to be asking yourself, especially if you looked at the link and checked out my LinkedIn, and you're like, this guy's just a software engineering EM guy. I don't know what he's doing here talking about game development. So we'll get there. Also, we're going to be talking about like why you need to define success. The real answer is kind of complicated, but like at the main, most basic level, if you haven't defined what success looks like for you, it's very difficult to figure out A, how to get there, and B, and more importantly, to know you're there when you do. Because it's, well, there's a tendency amongst devs, and I think probably most of you know what I'm talking about, where it meets your initial expectations, but like it needs polish, right? Like I'm sure everybody's been there. I know some of you personally and know that you're there in that space a lot of the time. Yeah, shift uncomfortably. After that, we're going to kind of talk about like what you might want to do if you're trying to get where you'd originally planned to go and you find that you're not going there. But real briefly, we're going to click forward maybe? There we go. So yeah, why I'm here. So I have recently, not relatively recently, but not super recently, published a game. It's called They Stirred. It is a tabletop role-playing game. It's basically the culmination of, I won't say how many years of tabletop role-playing, but I started when I was very small, and I have a lot of gray hair now, so you can draw your own conclusions. Why I'm here to talk about, I mean, most of you are probably computer game developers. So what do I have to say about that? What do I know about computer programming, that sort of thing? Well, I'm the engineering manager of a team for Samsung's IoT platform called SmartThings. You may have heard of Samsung. It is the largest manufacturer of consumer electronics on the planet. I manage a team of 8 software engineers. I wear a lot of hats in that role. Probably the most important one that I wear from my boss's perspective at least is I manage a lot of projects. Depending on the average week, between 4 and maybe 10. So I have a lot of experience managing projects. I have a lot of experience taking something that's fairly ill-defined and moving it into like a done state where people would look at it and be like, yes, this is a thing that I want. It's done. I understand why it was built, and it's a thing that people in the market might want. The other thing I'm getting better at in this role is stakeholder communication. And to be honest with you, it's not a thing that comes naturally to me. I like to talk, but I don't really like to tell people the things they generally want to hear necessarily. So we'll talk a little bit about how to communicate with your stakeholders if you're running a crowdsourced campaign, because that's really, when you're doing that, communicating with the people in your campaign is really the most important thing you can do. So the reason that you wanted to have goals and define what you're trying to do and know what success looks like is because you need to know where you're going. And if you don't know where you're going, it's very hard to get there. Imagine taking a road trip, right? If you don't know where you're going and you're going off on your road trip, how do you know when you've arrived at your destination? Well, you don't. And that's also true of, I'm sure some of you have worked as professional wage slave software engineers and had somebody come to you and be like, this thing, the website, this widget, this tool is too slow, make it faster. And that always brings the question, well, how much, right? Like if I make it 5% faster, is that enough? Do you mean a certain amount of latency in a request? Or do you mean, just perceptibly faster, right? And engineers being how many of us are, or designers or makers, we're like, well, it's 5% faster. It's faster. I'm done. So it's important to define exactly what you mean in a project and kind of have an idea before you start the project of what success is actually going to look like. Sure. So if you talk to your friends in project management, if you have friends in project management, I know my wife doesn't think they're very likable, so she doesn't have friends in project management, but we come butt heads on that. But they'll tell you that that a good goal has 5 components, and they'll tell you that it is a smart goal. A good goal is a smart goal, by which they mean they are specific and measurable, achievable and realistic and time-bound. If you cheat a little bit on time-bound and make it one word. They try to say that these 5 things are 5 different things, but I mean, if you look in the dictionary, specific and measurable are pretty close, and achievable and realistic are very, very close. So you would probably find them in a thesaurus as being synonyms, right? So I like to kind of group them as 3 things like this, and we'll talk about them in that way. But first things first, this is really hard. So setting goals that you can actually achieve is pretty important for your mental health and also for being able to do them. So one thing that's very important when you're trying to set out on a project, especially a crowd-funded one where you're going to be asking people to part with their hard-earned money up front, sight unseen on the end result, it's really important to know kind of how much you're going to get, right? And there's a couple things you want to be aware of when you're doing that. And when I was first starting out on this project, they started basically what I was looking at is, well, I've backed a lot of stuff on Kickstarter. I've backed a lot of stuff on other platforms as well. How much money do people usually make on a campaign, on their first campaign, making a product similar to mine that has about what I have going into this, which is virtually no actual professional experience doing this, or even non-professional experience. And so I went out and I found, I did kind of a survey of the things I backed, and I found a lot of things that were very exciting to look at. People raising hundreds of thousands of dollars to make a book. I'm like, that'd be really cool, but that's definitely not me, because this is like somebody that's done like 8 or 9 of these projects before, and they know what they're doing. They've got a dedicated fan base. They know how to do internet marketing, which is a thing I'd never done before. And they know, generally speaking, what they're doing. So that I'm like, well, that's not me. So I need to set a actual realistic goal, which is what I ended up doing. I think I raised 2.5 times what I actually was looking for, hit all of my stretch goals, and was able to actually deliver on my initial promised timeline, which was even more shocking, all because I kind of sat down, thought through what I was going to be doing, and kind of planned it out ahead of time, which is what we're going to talk about, the non-boring way to do it, hopefully. Because if I'm being real honest here, that's not, like, being organized and stuff is really not me, naturally speaking. And like you, I was doing this for fun, right? It was not my job to go out and do this. I didn't need this to put my daughter through college or anything like that. I was just trying to, like, make my money back that I was investing into this thing, which I did, which was exciting. So getting specific. So after you've made a realistic goal, it's having like a kind of nebulous idea of what you want to deliver is good, but if you don't know specifically what you're looking to deliver, it's actually very, as it turns out, very difficult to actually like get there. You can kind of get exponentially closer to it, but you never actually reach it if you didn't give yourself an actual like measurable goal. So, part of that is going to be defining these sorts of things, like why are you doing what you're doing? Who are you making it for? And when you do make it, why are they going to like the thing you've made? So when I was thinking about my game, what I wanted really to do was kind of create a game that was fit more my style of storytelling. I love D&D. I've played D&D for, I don't know, maybe like 25 years easily. Okay, more than that. That would have been a decade ago. Whatever. But I've played D&D for a long time. I love D&D, but it's not like a good, easy to pick up and teach to somebody like my dad kind of game, which is kind of the thing I like doing. When I've run games, my favorite players to play with have always been people who are not experienced role players, right? Like, I love when the kid who is playing in the game shows up with his mom and she's like, I'd like to try this too. Those people are my favorite people to play tabletop role-playing games with, because they never know they don't know what to expect, and so everything's new and exciting to them, and it's just really fun to share that like newbie excitement with them. And so I wanted to make a game that appealed to those kinds of people. And so that was one of my success criteria, was that the game is simple enough that I can explain it to my parents, and like they would be able to successfully understand the rules and play the game with me. So that's the kind of thing when I talk about when I'm talking about being specific. You need to know who you're making it for and why they're going to like it. And then another thing that's very important is, how is it new and different? So I did a quick survey of what games were out there. There's several that fall into the kind of campy zombie survival role-playing scenario world. All Flesh Must Be Eaten is top of the heap for me, but there's a couple other ones out there too. But all of them didn't really meet my criteria, so I'm like, cool, I actually have a fairly unique idea. This is sort of marketable. Cool, I bet I can make this work. And then the other thing is, but all of those things drive you towards how will you actually know you're done when you are done. So I had some pretty succinct success criteria here, and I knew where I was going, which was great. And really, if you have those things, your project is well on its way to success already at that point. You just need to go out and follow your plan. So the next thing, once you specifically know what you're trying to do, is you need to start doing it, which is actually probably really the hardest part. And because of that, having a deadline makes it much easier. This is the time-bound aspect of the SMART goals, right? So you want to give yourself some kind of deadline. In my case, I was like, well, I know I know more or less what my Kickstarter campaign is going to look like, because I know what a comparable Kickstarter campaign looks like. I know how much money I'm trying to get. I, at this point, had already drawn up a budget and kind of had an idea. We'll talk about how to do that later. But generally speaking, I was like, well, I know what I want to do, and now I need to give myself a deadline, or being the procrastinator I am, I will never get there. This will join the dust heap of dozens of other projects I've started and never finished. My Google Drive is full of them. I had to buy more storage. So there you go. But so I set myself a goal. I'm like, I'm going to launch this Kickstarter one way or another in 4 months. And if it's not ready at that point, I will accept failure. Well, probably not, but I'll just move the deadline out. But having the deadline there actually gave me a compelling reason to work on this every night and actually get it wrapped up and get it done. So, for you, you might not be running a crowdfunding campaign. You might be doing something different. But like, it's very important to give yourself some kind of deadline to motivate yourself if you're a procrastinator like myself. So you might be thinking, okay, should I launch the beta or should I try to sneak one more feature in there? If you have that deadline, you know what you have to do because you either don't have time to sneak the new feature in or you do, but you also know if you can. And I will quote, I don't know who this is a quote from. I heard it somewhere and I've said it like hundreds of times after this, but perfect is the enemy of done. Because, and I tell this to my engineers all the time. I had to have this conversation with somebody today because he's overanalyzing he overanalyzes everything, wants to make sure it's perfect before it launches. I'm like, dude, it's not going to be perfect when it launches either way. No matter how long you spend, there's going to be a bug somewhere, right? Just launch it, see what happens. You won't find that bug until you do, right? That's the thing. It's just like, no matter how much time you spend packing for a trip, you're going to forget something probably, unless you're, I don't know, my wife level of organized. But like, it's very much true, right? So just launch it and see what happens. So once you've figured out where you're going very specifically, and you know how long and you have a deadline for getting there, that's when it's time to actually figure out a plan of, well, how do I get from where I am right now to where I want to be? And there's 3 things that are pretty simple that you need to figure out what to get there. The first thing is, what things do you need to get there? What are you actually making? You know your goal, right? But like, how are you turning that goal into a real thing? Like, what is that real thing going to look like when it's done? And then the last thing is, and this is perhaps the most important, what are you very much not making? And we'll get into each of these in turn. So the first thing is, what do you need? All of us are good at certain things, and all of us are bad at others. And virtually any project you're going to undertake, some of those things you're going to be good at, and some of them you won't. And those are the things you need, right? Obviously. So some of the things you might need would be specific skills. For example, if you're writing a book, or writing a program, a video game, or whatever, you might be a very gifted programmer. I know several of us, I know some in this room definitely are. But you might be not so great of an artist. For example, I am a horrible artist, at least digitally, but I can write some pretty good code. Other people might be artists, but need somebody to write code for them to turn their vision into life, right? If you're writing a book, you may need an illustrator for the book. You may need an editor for your book. You may need, you may need a typesetter, stuff like that. Like, there's skill sets that you're not going to have. You need to figure out how to get those things, and you need a plan for that. Because otherwise, you're going to get to that point, and you're going to be, well, as I have in the past, and many of you probably have as well, very discouraged at that point. Because you're like, man, I've got this cool idea for a game. I need art, and I can write the code, but I need the art, or whatever, right? Next thing you need to think about is what you're actually delivering. Like, are you delivering a physical product? Will you be printing out CDs in your basement? Are you really old school? Is that a thing people still do? I don't know. Are you going to be delivering this by Steam or PDFs on itch.io or like whatever? How are you putting your product into the hands of somebody, and in what format? That's the most important thing, is because you need to know how it's going to be built, right? And then the last thing you really need to know of what you need is, who are you giving this to? Like, who are the people that are going to be, you already thought about this, but how are you going to get them to know that the thing that you've made is a thing they're going to like? How are you going to get it into their minds, into their headspace, so that they know to come get it? And that, in my case at least, and probably most maker-type folks, that unfortunately means you need to do some amount of marketing. You're kind of going to have to bite the bullet on that one. It's not as hard as you might think. Running a good internet campaign is as easy as hiring someone on Fiverr, actually, as it turned out, for $20, who's a marketing student. But I mean, there's plenty of other options as well out there. You could probably figure it out on your own. So then the real question is, what are you actually making and how are you doing it? So if you're writing a piece of software, what platforms are you going to support? Is it going to run on a PC? Is it going to run on some kind of gaming console? If you're making a book, you're also going to be thinking the same sorts of things. Are you making a paperback book? Are you making a hardcover because you hate yourself? Because you're going to make absolutely no money doing that, as it turns out. What languages are you supporting? There's an analog either way. Are you going to write it in Scala, as I imagine John over here would be? Or are you going to pick a more sane video game development language, like, I don't know, C#? What tools are you going to use to build this thing? There's plenty of tools out there. I know very little about them because I've never developed a video game, but I know they exist. What tool, if you're writing a book, for example, what tooling are you actually using? Google Docs is great up until the point you actually have to typeset things, and then you discover it's absolutely horrible for that. So my recommendation there would not be to not do that, which I found out much to my chagrin. If you're making a physical offering, for example, a book, right? What is it going to be like? What's your ideal page count? What format is it going to be in? If you're making a game, are you going to have like one of those sweet old school physical manuals in the game that talks about how to play the game and like gives you hints and stuff like that from my childhood, which probably dates me pretty much, or are you just going to be just handing out CDs in a paper thing at a con, like, for example, right? Or anywhere in between, right? One of the most important things that you're going to need to think about when you're actually figuring out how you're going to make this thing are which parts are independent of each other. So, like, if you're, for example, making a game and you know what your theme and style is going to generally be, you're ready to make the art. But if you don't actually have that, you're not ready to do that. So, like, there's dependent tasks there, right? And some of them, however, don't have any dependencies whatsoever, right? So you might be able to make your marketing copy while you're also, for example, writing the game. But having like an idea of which of the tasks you need to accomplish in series versus in parallel lets you kind of like map out where all of your work's going to go, lets you figure out lets you go back, take your deadline and work backwards from there and figure out how you're actually going to get it done by the deadline, which is key to actually feeling good about your project at the end, as I learned. And then this is a difficult question to kind of think about, especially as like a hobbyist, because like, what are you not making is kind of a weird question to be phrasing. It lexically doesn't make a lot of sense, but software engineers all the time talk about scope creep and like that's not in scope when you don't want to do a feature that product pitches to you, right? But as a hobbyist game developer, it's extremely important to understand, and for the same reasons that that you might need to understand that as a professional developer as well, because it lets you avoid doing the things that you hadn't set out to do and building things that the people you're trying to build this for aren't interested in. For example, if you are targeting a group, if you're targeting that group of people that are like single-player games are the absolute best, do you want to add a battle royale mode? Probably not. If you're conversely targeting people who are super into Fortnite or something like that, and this is your new idea that's going to revolutionize battle royale games, do you need a single-player campaign? Things like that. What aren't you building is your guiding beacon for figuring out, I had a great idea in the middle of the night to add this new thing to the game or whatever I'm building, and should I do it? It lets you say, no, I'm not doing that. That's not what I'm building. It's not what I set out to do, and it won't fit in my timeline, and so I shouldn't do it. I had many ideas that fell to the wayside and became like 3 or 4 other folders in Google Docs that I've literally done nothing with since then, but, well, I should. But we'll come back to that. But the most important thing to do when you're thinking about this is to remember what your original goal is and to, again, be realistic, because it's very easy to go far afield and come up with all these crazy ideas and then never, ever actually finish your product, which is, for me as a hobbyist, and probably most of you, the most satisfying part is getting your thing out there for other people to have in their hands and enjoy, right? That's why we do build things, is because we want to see other people enjoy them, or enjoy them ourselves even. So I guess my big point of advice here is figure out how to get your product into other people's hands, launch your product and get it going. Once you're at the point of like, okay, I'm ready to actually start build this thing, you're going to run into a lot of different problems. But if you have a plan in place, it's much easier to get where you're going to begin with. So scope creep, that's a thing that I've kind of talked about it a lot, but it's very tempting, right, to be like, oh, I should really add fill in the blank other thing that I hadn't thought of, and now that I'm halfway through and it's a great idea. But again, putting this thing in people's hands is what you really want to do. You want a finished product at the end of the day. So I mean, my piece of advice would be save those ideas for later. Definitely write them down, because you will forget them if you don't. And just remember, there's always room for a V2 or a post-release patch or those sorts of things, depending on what kind of your format is. But like most things support that these days, so it's not that hard to get a new idea that fits into the paradigm into somebody's hands after the fact. And even if it is too difficult, you can always make a new version of the game. Heck, they made Overwatch 2, right? I don't know, does that have new ideas in it? People were telling me today it doesn't. But I guess the thing is then, so sometimes though you do have a new idea, and you realize there's something that's going to absolutely torpedo your plan. What do you do when you get there? Well, the first thing that you have to realize is sometimes your plans just don't work. And it's not necessarily just a thing about you. It's really easy to internalize that when your plans don't work out, and blame yourself. I've absolutely done that before. As I say, I have a whole Google Drive full of game ideas that are like 90% done, but I never actually pulled the trigger on because I ran into some problem that I couldn't figure out a way to work through, and I never launched them. So just remember, it happens to everybody, and the real test of how good you are at what you're doing is how you deal with the hardship, right? Because like everything it's very easy to get the easy part done, but the real test is the hard part, right? I used to work at a fancy restaurant. My boss told me the real way you measure how good of a cook you are is not the first plate of food you send out in the night, because that's the easy one, right? Your whole station is all neatly arranged, all your prep is done, everything's ready to go. The true thing that shows if you're a good cook or not is your last plate of food in the night, when everything's a mess, you just want to go home, you have already done an 8-hour shift or more, you've been on your feet that whole time. When it's hard, that's when you're really showing like what you're made of, right? And in the same way, when you're doing any kind of project, the real measure of how good you are at what you're doing and how dedicated and professional, or not professional, but how dedicated and how into what you're doing is what you do when it gets hard. So one of the things that's very important to do is to realize that when things aren't going right, you should stop and get help. This is also a piece of restaurant advice. I won't quote my boss at the time directly, but what he did tell someone on my very first day is, when you find things aren't going well, and that's not how he phrased it, it was much more colorful. When you find things aren't going well, you need to stop and get help. And honestly, it's good life advice. He meant when you're cooking a steak, but like it's solid life advice in general. And there are a lot of people around you who may not be fully invested in your project. I know, for example, my wife wasn't. But like, they're there to help you because they care about you. So you've got friends you can talk to. They probably have similar interests to you. If something's exciting to you, it's probably at least somewhat exciting to them, and they might be able to pitch in and help out. I had a lot of my friends pitch in for playtesting my game, and it was a huge amount of fun. All of my friends are my day job coworkers, just to be clear. So there you go. But also you have family members who also care about you, probably more than your friends do, most likely. They live with you after all, for the most part. They are probably also extremely excited to help you out on these sorts of things. Maybe not excited, that might be a strong word, but they're certainly willing to, probably. Maybe even your neighbors are. I don't know. I don't know my neighbors very well because I don't like to go outside. But you know what I'm saying. And then finally, if you're really, 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 really in a bind, you can hire help. That's a thing. There's plenty of ways to do that. You can either, I can't speak highly enough of the people I've hired off of Fiverr while I've been doing projects. They've been universally great. But if you've set up your budget correctly, which is an important thing, and you needed those things to begin with, it's very possible to hire outside help to do the things that you just can't do on your own, and also to get you out of a bind. For example, it turns out your prose does not read as flowery, with as much flowery phrasing as you might want. An editor is actually, as it turns out, surprisingly inexpensive. So I can't recommend that highly enough either. I suppose you could probably have ChatGPT do it for you these days, if you really wanted to. And then sometimes you really do need to change course. And that's very hard to accept sometimes once you've already gotten really invested in a project. But you really do, when things are going very wrong and you're off course, you have to ask yourself the hard questions, really. First off, you very much need to identify what's going wrong. And that's sometimes very challenging, not because it's hard to see what's going wrong, but it's hard to admit it to yourself sometimes. And that's the real challenge there. But once you do know what's wrong, it's important to figure out what the least you can change is that makes it still work. Because throwing out the whole thing just because 5% isn't working right is really not a good way to finish your project, as it turns out. Once you do that, you need to communicate that change to the people who are going to care about it, especially if you're running a crowdfunding campaign, for example. I'm sure some of you have been on a probably on a Kickstarter where hey, it turned out that this didn't work out, so we're going to have to either change the timeline or maybe change what we're delivering in some way. You've probably seen those emails come out. I know I'm always bummed out. I backed View, which is a kind of glasses, smart glasses, many, many years ago. It took me 3 years past when they said they were going to get them. So I got those communications for them every other month where they're hey, it's going to be another 6 months, guys. Disappointing, but hey, I'd like to know. So once you do change your plans, please do communicate them with people who are your stakeholders, because it's important that they know. And then once you have your plan and you've communicated what your plan is, it's important to get on it. It can feel very daunting and overwhelming to do it, but the thing that makes that feel less daunting and overwhelming, it turns out, is to just go do the thing instead of sitting around worrying about it. I cannot express the number of projects that I've seen on Kickstarter and backed in many cases, on Kickstarter, where the person who starts the project meets with an unexpected amount of success. I'm certainly not speaking from personal experience, and finds, oh my God, there are hundreds of people waiting for me to deliver a product into their hands, and they have a certain amount of expectations of what I'm going to be giving to them, and it feels very overwhelming. I've seen entire projects canceled. I've seen people walk away from Kickstarter projects and other crowdfunded projects just because it got very real. And the way, in my experience, the way to get rid of those feelings is to just start doing it. So that'd be my advice. Just go do the thing. And then I think the most important thing is to over-communicate. And I've kind of spoken to this already a bit, but when you're changing plans, it's very critical to let people know. And it's easy to think, oh, well, I'll only communicate this change out once I know what it looks like. But if you do that, that's the kiss of death for communication, right? Is waiting until you know. You need to say early in the earlier you communicate that things are going to be different to people, the more willing they are to accept that they're going to be different. So if you are indeed changing plans, my advice to you would be tell people as soon as you know. that you're going to be changing plans and be like, we don't know what we're doing just yet, but things are going to be different, and they'll probably be different in this general way, but look to hear more soon is a message that people will be like, okay, I know what that means and I know what to expect now, rather than not hearing anything from 6 months while you just have a mini panic attack. Well, I guess 6 months isn't a mini panic attack, is it? But you know what I'm saying. So I guess to wrap it all up, and I hate saying this because as a person who's disorganized and a procrastinator, this does not resonate with me, but it is absolutely true and a thing that I struggle with still. But as it turns out, having a plan helps with stress when things aren't going right. Gets hard, whatever. But it's very true. And my biggest piece of advice would be go do your, if you're thinking about doing something or you're halfway through a project, give yourself a deadline, have a plan for getting across the finish line, and do it. Because it's really cool to launch an actual product and have it in people's hands and have them telling you, this is cool, I like it. It's a huge rush, and I highly recommend you do it. I can't say enough about it. And that's what I came here to say.
Excellent timing. I think now we can open it up to questions, and I can walk around with this microphone and have people answer questions. And I'm also monitoring chat as well. So if you have a question in chat, feel free to ask a thing. Yeah, but I'm going to walk over to this person raising their hand.
What is some advice you might give for someone that is terrible at planning and is trying to get better?
Oh man, that is hard. But you have asked the right person because I'm also terrible at planning. So my first piece of advice is really write down what you want it to look like at the end, right? And then give yourself a deadline, figure out what the major components of the task are, and work backwards so you know how long you have to do each thing. And if you make the thing small enough that you can see that you're making progress, it's really very much easier because you get like, it's that same sort of thing you get from like stupid mobile games, right? Where there's like that little tiny hit of dopamine and you're like, oh man, now I'm addicted. It's the same thing, right? If you have a bunch of small tasks, first off, it makes the whole thing look less daunting and feel achievable. And second of all, you actually steadily build progress that you can actually see, right? And hitting a couple, the other thing I would recommend is once you've started doing it, mix together long-term goals and short things that you can easily deliver. Because like getting one or two little short things done makes it easier to make it through one of the longer, like grueling stretches where there's a thing where there's like no good way to break it up, right? Because then you can deliver a couple more small pieces after that, and then you kind of just build momentum that way, and then kind of your project takes on its own life eventually once you get past like a certain point. So that'd be my main piece of advice is start small and build towards what you're going for because you'll get momentum going.
Hi there. So yeah, my question is, in the write-up for the talk, you mentioned that the degree of success that you had with the project caught you a little bit off guard and was the source of some amount of stress. I was wondering if, and some of the subjects you discussed in the talk touched on that kind of thing, but I was wondering if, for your project, if you had any examples you could mention of ways that the process, especially on the Kickstarter and the success you had, proved stressful, how you're able to deal with that, especially if those are themes that you think that weren't just like super specific to your experience but could apply to other people.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I mean, really what I went into launching this Kickstarter, right, with kind of an idea that I need X amount of money, right, to be able to break even on publishing a around 80-page paperback book detailing both the rules of the game and kind of giving you an idea of like, I just read several books on screenwriting. I was like, there's a very specific structure to a story. If you in modern movies, once you see it, you can't possibly miss it. And I wouldn't recommend reading Save the Cat unless you want to ruin every like major movie you watch afterwards. But like that was kind of part of the book, was kind of like how to structure a story so that it feels cinematic. So I had kind of an idea of what I wanted to deliver, and it resonated with a lot more people than I thought it was going to. And I had set up, a bunch of stretch goals in the Kickstarters. Most people do. And if I remember right, I had a month Kickstarter, and I believe it took me a grand total of 2 weeks to exceed all of my initial stretch goals, which was kind of surprising. And it kind of, my wife will probably tell you, what I will say is she told me that if I get that stressed out the next time I do another crowdfunding campaign, I'm not allowed to do another crowdfunding campaign. Because as people started putting more money into it, I was like, oh my God, this is a real thing. This is actually happening. All of these people are about to give me, for somebody writing a book, thousands of dollars to make a book is pretty surprising in many ways. And at the end, I added stretch goals up to I believe it ended up being well over, I think it was almost 3 times what I actually thought I needed to do the project. And within the last 10 minutes of the thing, somebody was like, well, I'm just going to increase my pledge to make sure that we hit that because I want to have hardcovers. And hardcovers with an alternate cover. So I hadn't actually thought we would get there, to be totally honest, and I hadn't. Part of my advice of why not to add scope creep is this, because I hadn't done my math very well, and it turned out that printing two different covered hardcovers is actually very expensive, because you don't get a bulk discount because you split your order basically in half. Or, well, you do get a bulk discount, but it's not as much, right? So it made my budget much tighter than I really expected it to be. And I could have eaten the cost, but that felt like cheating in a way. And to be clear, it all worked out at the end of the day, and I did make, I believe, a grand total of $400 for maybe hundreds of hours of my time. So not a great investment in terms of hourly return, but a huge amount of self-esteem payment, right? But that was that's kind of where I'm going with it. Once the momentum of a crowdfunding campaign gets going, it's really easy to kind of get, wow, this is really exciting. I should add more stuff and keep doing these things. And my advice would be don't. To be totally honest with you, once you blow past all of your original stretch goals, just stay there. Unless you're good at math while you're excited, which is harder than I realized. So that's kind of what it came down to. Is I ended up having to get a little creative with my budgeting and not deliver quite as much of an art book as I'd originally kind of hoped to do, which, to be honest, was kind of stressful. And then the other thing that I found very stressful was actually wrapping up the project. I was maybe 80 to 85% done with my manuscript at the time, and that last 15% was very daunting because it was the part where I was explaining, here's how you structure a role-playing game to feel like a cinematic movie with in the 3-act form, right, if you know what I'm saying. And it felt very much like writing a book report for a bunch of nerds who are about to tear me apart because they also know what I'm talking about, possibly better than me. And I ended up, I don't know, I was chatting with one of my friends, and he's like, well, have you ever considered, changing the venue you sit in while you're writing? And I ended up doing something that, at the end of the day, felt kind of stupid, but it actually did work. I went from sitting in my basement typing on my laptop to sitting on an upside-down 5-gallon bucket in my garage wearing cowboy boots because Cowboy Matt could freaking do this thing, was at the end of the day. It felt very stupid, but what I will tell you is it did work. Whether that's a sign of an imminent mental breakdown or because I had a great idea, I can't really tell you, but it did work, so I guess perhaps a bit of both.
Any other questions? Raise your hand. I'll walk up to you. Good? I'm not seeing any questions in chat. I think the funniest thing we were talking about is Oh yeah, sometimes just putting on the schedule, just like spend 2 minutes thinking about the thing I to plan doing X daunting thing on the checklist of the day is the kind of stuff that we need to do. Like it's like, oh, I'm just putting 5 minutes to make this thing work. It makes sense. I'm just saying, this is a good idea. But yeah, if there's no other questions, we can actually bring this to a close. Oh wait, I'm so sorry.
Oh, okay.
So, can I hold her or not? Okay. One thing that I've found very successful for me, at least in planning, has been time tracking and estimating before I time track and comparing how it goes. Because a lot of times I have like a percent that gets added on top or new things that come in. Did you, especially when I'm like creating something new, that I haven't done before, and I know for you, like this was a new experience as well. Did you do any sort of time tracking, or what ways did you solve like working backwards if some of it is unknown to you?
Right. So that's a good question. So I do have a certain amount of experience estimating things that I don't really know how big they are. It comes with probably 15 years of software development and being asked, how long will it take you to do this poorly defined thing? But yeah, I was definitely wrong about a couple things, but like in general, I think it was kind of a wash, and I maybe got very lucky in that. But as someone who's newer at estimating tasks that are sort of unknown, my advice would be it's going to take longer than you think, because as a person who is kind of like a crafty, kind of like hands-on, liking to do stuff person, you tend to underestimate the difficulty of things, because especially it's a thing that I know software engineers do. It's infuriating to watch software engineers encounter a new field because they're always like, oh, well, it's just this, but like with this substituting this, and then they realize there's a couple other things, and then the Dunning-Kruger effect is very strong, right? Is I guess what I'm saying. So just first off, be aware it's going to take longer than you think it's going to take is the main thing, and always build yourself wiggle room, because you'll estimate that it'll take longer than you think, but it'll still take longer than you think. So don't cut yourself like very tight would be, I guess, my thing, especially if it's not something you're very familiar with. I actually had trouble figuring out how to do international shipping because, man, that was hard. I would never do that again, first of all. But as it turns out, you have to fill out a bunch of forms for a bunch of countries that don't really care about you or your problems, and it takes a long time to get your tax stuff in a row to actually ship to those countries, for example. So like I had estimated that would take 3 months, which obviously is a joke now, but like at the time I'm like, sure, why not? It's all online. It can't be that hard. But boy, Australia was the easiest one. I've never been happier for NAFTA when I was trying to ship to Canada, I'll tell you that much, because I didn't have to deal with any nonsense. But trying to ship to Australia was actually very difficult, as it turns out. And despite everything being online, it took months just to even figure out how to do it. So yeah, even if you're fairly experienced in estimating things that you don't know the size of, it'll take longer than you think, I guess, is my piece of advice.
Any other questions? I'm checking this time I don't miss anybody. Then I believe we're good. Thank you so much. Another round of applause for our wonderful presenter tonight. Fantastic. I think we can actually close out. I would say thank you so much for joining us for another hybrid meeting for IGDA Twin Cities. For all the in-person audiences, I can take it. Thank you. Make sure to take your glasses, rinse them out, put them in the dishwasher. That's what I was told last time. I made a mistake. I said put it in the sink, but no. You rinse them out, put them in the dishwasher that says dirty. There you go. Yes, we can rinse it out there. But yes, for everyone else on the stream, I'm going to go ahead and end it here. If you guys are wanting to go chat online, you guys are welcome to join the Discord on that side. But I believe all of us in-person meeting people are going to go head out to a place, which will decide when the stream is closed.